Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online Female Changemaker event. My name is Sonja Ament. I'm a program manager at the Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation here in Germany. Our focus for today is the country Georgia, a South Caucasus region country of about 4 million people. And we want to talk about the changing role of women in Georgian society, their women's rights, and the current situation in these difficult times. And this web talk here is a part of our Female Changemaker series, a series of web talks in which our moderator, Caroline Gill, you can already see her here in the picture, she interviews female changemakers across the world that are currently advocating for democratic change in their countries. But before we dive into that topic and introduce today's speakers, I would like to take a minute to say a few words about the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation, as some of you might participate in one of our events for the very first time. So, based on the principles of liberalism, the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom offers political education in Germany and abroad. And with our events and publications, we help people to become actively involved in political affairs. And on top of that, we also do support talented young students with scholarships. And since 2007, we actually have the edition for freedom, and it has become an established part of our foundation's name. So it's Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom. And as we sadly all know, freedom is something a lot of places and people in this world still don't have. So this is what drives us to campaign for freedom and also to take on the responsibility that comes with it. And now it's a great honor for me to welcome our speakers for today. Georgian jurist and politician Tinatin Khidasheli. She is a former civil society activist who was appointed as Georgia's Minister of Defense on May 1st, 2015, becoming the country's first ever female defense minister. Welcome. Next, Dr. Khatia Kikalishvili. She is the program director of the Eastern Partnership Project at the Center for Liberal Modernity. And before joining Liberal Modernity, she worked for a number of years as an advisor for the foreign and European policy at the German Bundestag. Welcome. And Caroline Gill. She has a degree in European relations and socioeconomic transformation, and for many years has initiated and moderated discussions with international experts. And she will be interviewing our two guests today. So thank you all for being here. Before we start, one last, information from my side. You are very welcome to ask your questions during this web talk. And you can therefore please use the button on the lower end of your screen. It's called Q&A, and you can post your questions there, and we will try to tie in as many as possible. So now, I hope you'll all enjoy this web talk. Caroline, let's start.
Thank you, Sonja. It's a great pleasure to meet you again for this wonderful talk series, #Female Changemaker. Good evening around the world. Good evening from Germany. First of all, let me thank the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom and especially Melanie Kögler and Sonja Ament and the whole team to make this idea came true. My name is Caroline Gill, and I'm happy to be the host for this series. We already started in 2021 on 8th of March with Veronika Zepkalo, one of the leaders of the Belarusian opposition, and it's a great honor to continue now with Georgia. I'm very happy to discuss and to meet Tina and Khatia to focus on Georgia, to focus on the situation of women in Georgia, women's rights. And I think that sometimes Georgia, as a let's say smaller country, is now not so much in the focus, although with the beginning of the Russian war in Ukraine, of course, the question got more visible also in our media. So I think it's very important that we focus also on the country in the Caucasus. Well, with our series, we want to empower and inspire women to stand up for the rights because we believe that change can start at home, at work, in society, and it always starts with a decision. Introducing women from all over the world, we can understand their motivation, learn from the situation in the country, discuss solidarity and the power of the moment. So Tina, Khatia, it's a pleasure to meet you online here. This talks are recorded and can be seen also after our live talks. And normally I start with a question to our female changemaker, but this time I want to start with our German expert who is based in Berlin and working for the think tank LibMod, Liberale Moderne. Khatia, because I heard that you met Tina before, and of course you have close ties with Georgia. Where did you meet Tina, and to what extent you would place her in the ranks of our female change makers for Georgia's society?
Thank you very much, and good evening. Thank you very much to invite me. And this is very, very important event and very, very important topic. I met Tina personally some years ago, I think about 7 or 8 years ago in the Bundestag, when I was organizing a bilateral meeting with the members of the German Bundestag with Tina. This was time when Tina was our first female Minister of Defense, and I was senior advisor in German Bundestag. But as a female change maker, as a politician, and as a lawyer, I have known Tina since the 2000s when I was a student in Georgia, and I must admit that she also belonged to the Liberal Party Republicans in Georgia, which I mostly voted for. So we know the problem in Germany, even in Germany, that women are not so much presented in politics than men. And it is no wonder that this in post-Soviet countries, it is also the case. And Tina is one of the few brave and strong women who, so despite the masculine political culture in Georgia, was and is very active opposition. So, and for me personally, it's very interesting to follow her statements, because she's a lawyer and I also studied law in Georgia and then in Germany, and I found her statements on human rights and on constitutional issues very interesting. And please, Tina, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Tina was one of the first generations of Georgians who had this opportunity to get out, to go to the West and to get their education in the West after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So, and Caroline already mentioned that she was our first female Minister of Defense, and I think she's definitely very important and critical female voice in Georgian civil society now.
Tina, are you satisfied with this introduction? And if yes, I would like to ask you, because we heard about this post-Soviet or the Soviet past, Soviet society, but perhaps you can introduce us in the Georgian society, how it was like when you grew up and as a young girl, as a woman, to get to know your career much better.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me in this discussion, this talk. It's an absolute honor for me, and thank you, Khatia, for this introduction. I never liked sitting and listening to this kind of stuff, because That's somehow I always think it's not deserved. There is so much to be done, and at the end of the day, what you did, if you did anything important, should be reflecting on the country. And unfortunately, my country is not now one of those success stories in these parts of the world. Well, people say in this part of the world it is still doing well, but that's not the real measure that we want to look after. Khatia is absolutely right. Yes, I was amongst those young Georgians who got the opportunity after the breakup of the Soviet Union to escape this very dangerous, life-threatening sometimes conditions in this space, and get education in the West. My generation was, literally speaking, the very first generation who had this opportunity. I graduated high school still in the Soviet Union, and became student already in independent Georgia. In 1990, I graduated the school, and then in 1990, at the end of 1990, we had our first democratic elections when the Communist Party was defeated, and national movements, members of the national movement became leading political force in the country, including the president, parliamentary majority, government, etc. And times were very difficult. Speaking of situation as of women or girls at that time, probably the most important story of my life starts exactly with the choice of profession. That was the moment when somehow I've decided to be different. I've decided to make my choice in contradiction to the generally approved rules and traditions. If you go to the Georgian universities now, you won't see any difference between Georgian law schools and law schools in the West. Mixture of gender is absolutely there. Sometimes you might even have girls dominating over boys. But when I was entering the state university, at that time, that was the only university that offered law degree in my country. We were only 5 girls out of 125 law school entries, or those people who became students in 1990. Only 5 girls. And I remember when I graduated in high school, usually there was this ceremony if you were finishing on top of your class. There was a celebration of those who did it, who got this golden medal, whatever achievement, and there were like hundreds of people from all over the country, hundreds of pupils from all over the country, and the only task we had was to go to the podium, say thank you, and what you were gonna be after the graduation. And I remember that every girl who entered that podium was saying medical school. Like 90% of the girls said medical school. And some others like teacher or literature or history, this kind of departments. My last name in my own language starts on Kh, which is like letter pretty late on a list. So because of that, I was somewhere at the end of this whole crew. And I remember when I went up there, I was kind of stressed already because I didn't know what reaction to expect. And when I was asked, okay, what's your dream? What do you want to be? I said, I'm going to the law school. And I looked at the audience, and the voice that I've heard probably defined my entire future. And the voice was like these thousands of people sitting in there. The parents of the kids were like, oh, everybody did something like that. Like there was this crazy girl up there who decided suddenly to become, I don't know, policeman or prosecutor, or enter in some kind of a man world. And when I went down and went through these lines, people are looking at me like, don't you have a family? Don't you have a father or somebody to give you an advice? So that's how it all started, and this is where it all started, and this is where actually the person who is talking now to you was born. Then there were 5 very difficult years. That was the time when we had the civil war in the capital city, half of the city destroyed, first president ousted, another civil war in Western Georgia, then war in Abkhazia started. All those things happened during my years at the university. And there was a sort of general belief, regardless of you were a girl or boy, it did not really matter at that point, that we were kind of generation meant not to succeed. It was the generation that was meant for failures, for absolute failure, because university became very formalistic. There was no way you would go there as a normal student, like every day, going on the classes, preparing for the exam, sitting in a library. That was an unachievable, impossible task for us because of the paramilitary guns running on the streets. You could not walk out after 5 p.m.
It was which year, Tina?
It was 99. I entered university in 1990. First year was okay. And then it all started in 91. 91 civil war, 92 war in Abkhazia, 93, 94 retreat. And then those paramilitary forces occupying basically the rest of the country, particularly the capital city, running around, ganging around. 95. The terrorist attack on the president Shevardnadze. And I graduated in 95. So those were exactly the most difficult, the hardest times in Georgia. Not to talk about the rest of the problems. There was no electricity, no energy supply, absolutely none. It was not like for an hour you did not have a gas or electricity. No, we did not have it at all. We did not know actually what it was to have heat at home or to have electricity at home. So those are very difficult times. And in 95, living in those conditions, being student in those conditions, I've got this absolute brilliant opportunity of going out, living country for a year to do my master's in political sciences. And that's when you somehow get the feeling that, okay, you are given a chance and now you don't have the right to give up anymore. And you should fight for something completely different than you ever thought. So anyways, that's how it all started. In 94, together with my friends, we've created the largest, and I would say still, after all these years, most important human rights group in this country called Georgian Young Lawyers Association. I was heading it for over 10 years, being the chairwoman, head of the programs there, working as a human rights lawyer, mainly on torture cases, fighting the same guys. Some people in my childhood thought I wanted to be, being the policemen and prosecutors in the prisons. That was my daily job for over 10 years, starting from 96 when I came back to Tbilisi. Very, very difficult, very risky. The corruption, brutality in Georgian security forces and police force was extremely high. And there were no guarantees that those confrontations that we had with them would end with anything positive. But somehow we did have, we still had results. We had people escaping the dungeons of the police stations at several places in the country. And probably that was also because that was the time when the first independent media outlets were born, and publicizing your work was becoming possible. We kind of became public figures because every night there was another story about another tortured guy, either in police or the prison, and us fighting for their rights. And somehow that lifestyle, the problems of 90s in my country, defined rest of my life, living on the spotlight and being heavily involved in public sphere. It did not matter whether I was a minister or member of parliament or what official position I had. It was always like that. Regardless.
Why are you saying it did not matter?
Sorry?
Why you're saying that it did not matter?
Because the fact that I was meant to live the public life was already there. Way before I became even involved in official politics. I was not a member of any political party up until 2005, which was basically the whole decade after I became a kind of a public figure in this country. Only after a decade, I decided to actually move to politics, joined the Liberal Party here in Georgia, and ran for the office. But that was only 12 years after the whole fight started against the system and against the problems of a small post-Soviet republic on the Black Sea.
You mentioned the situation that you were standing in front of the audience at the school, and that you said that you want to study law. So perhaps also for our audience, so what was your motivation or impulse why you wanted to study law and be so different from perhaps other girls at that time?
Yes, to be honest, I did not know what was the name of the profession I wanted to have. Because being a lawyer in Georgia at that time meant that you were either becoming a prosecutor or a judge or defense attorney, but defense attorney was also not very clear what it was, because in the Soviet Union, attorneys were not necessarily the most respected people in the country. They were mainly used to bargain the bribe between the judge and the prosecutor. That was the main job attorneys had in this system and in this regime. So what I wanted to do when I was graduating the high school during the last 2 years, being very young, obviously 16, 17 years old, the whole movement was on the streets, anti-Soviet movement, massive demonstrations, hunger strikes. I have a 3 years older brother who was already a student at that time and who was part of the movement, and constantly on the hunger strike, constantly on the streets, almost never coming home at night because he would spend a night at another city in another main square protesting something. And somehow, already being 16 years old, I've ended up in those streets. I was already part of that movement, regardless the fact that I was very young. I was still in school. I was supposed to be doing something else. But the mood in the country was so high, optimism was so high, and the fight was so strong that I could not resist it. I could not just sit back and go to my geography or biology books and do nothing for that. And then obviously coming from that moment, doing whatever we were doing out there on the streets, I knew I never wanted to do something as normal human beings do, like become a doctor and cure people, which is an absolutely delightful and honorable job. Absolutely no doubts about it. But I wanted to do something that would be beneficial for more people, for more general public, rather than just one human being I could help. This is why I also, from the beginning, never thought becoming a lawyer, because lawyer as well as doctor for me meant that, okay, you take a case, you have one guy under your defense, you win, you lose, it's all about you and this one guy, and that's it, end of the story. That's how I was looking at things. What I wanted to do was something much bigger, again, involving bigger good, involving bigger gain. And at that time, and we are talking about 1989, 88, 89, 90, when I was supposed to make that decision, human rights as a concept and human rights lawyer as a job was not there. We did not know it even existed. We had no idea what it was. Now I know that that's what I wanted. That's what I always wanted to do. At that time, I had no name for it. And then when I looked at the departments, when I looked at the faculties, I looked at their curricula, somehow something on the back of my mind told me that, okay, this is where you want to go. You want to go to law school. And then you will figure out what it is you want to do. And then it took me just a couple of years, and already in 93, I already knew I was on the third year of my law school studies, and I already knew what was it that I wanted to do. And then pretty soon, in a year, we have created that human rights group that is still out there, still fighting, very active, and started doing the job that we always dreamed about. So basically, yeah, that's that was that, and also the fact that somebody was telling me that there are women jobs and men jobs was completely unacceptable for me. I never understood the concept. I never got it. Why there is something we are meant to be, and then there are things that are not acceptable for women. And obviously, being a lawyer at that time was one of those jobs where women were not welcome. I remember when I was finishing the first year at the law school and had first exams, one of the professors asked me at the exam. He was teaching us law enforcement agencies. That was the name of the class. And of course, law enforcement was particularly one of those men-dominated fields. It still is, unfortunately, men-dominated field. And he looked at me and he's like, "Why are you here?" And I kind of pretended I did not understand the question. And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he goes like, "Is your father a lawyer?" And I'm like, "No." "And is your mom a lawyer?" And they said, "No." "Oh, even in family you have no lawyers?" And I said, "No, they are all engineers." And then he's like, "And why are you here? What are you doing here?" And I didn't know what to say, because that was the only question he apparently had for me, not the questions about the subject he was teaching, not about the issues I was supposed to know, but just why I was there. And I was like, I answered probably very stupid. I gave a very stupid answer, but I was like, well, because when my daughter comes here, nobody asks her the same question. And he was like, wow, you must be very smart. And that was it. That was the whole exam. He did not ask me anything after that. So that was kind of an attitude we were always getting. But I think that it took just a couple of years for the law department here in Georgia to get me. And after that, there were no questions like that. They understood very well why I was there, what I was doing, and that I was exactly at the place I was supposed to be.
Khatia, a question to you, because you know the Georgian system quite well. You also grew up in Georgia. We heard a lot about this male-dominated professions and the Soviet legacy, but also in the Soviet system, women were working. They were not staying at home. They were working in factories. They had to take over males' professions because there was this need. So perhaps you can give us some more insight what role did women play in society, because we heard a lot about this legacy from Soviet times.
Khatia, microphone.
Sorry, thank you very much for this question. And thank you, Tina, to explain and to describe the situation in the dark 19th in Georgia. I remember this time very well too. And it was very, very difficult time. I think not only for Georgia, for the other post-Soviet countries too. And as I come back to your question, the role of women in Georgian society has always been strong and important. I can say this. Maybe it's a very short, so historical the fact that the golden period in the history of Georgia was under the Queen Tamar, and it was in the 12th century. And I grew up in Georgia, in Tbilisi, and in very liberal family where women always worked. My grandmother, as both my grandmothers, and my mama, as my mother, it was teacher's family. So, and this shaped as my personality very much, and maybe this is a reason why it was very easy for me to integrate in German society here, because I saw how independent and how strong the women in Europe and especially in Germany are. But the other thing is, so what kind of image or what kind of picture do we have in the whole country in Georgia? And this is the situation now. I'm not speaking about the past. So what this is not my field. So I'm working in European law, but not exactly on the rights of women and gender. But according to reports, as international reports, and also local organizations, so working for women's rights, the violence against women has increased, and so I have maybe I can give my personal opinion, and Tina can comment this. So I'm since 2005, so in Germany, so it's a very long time, and I'm always careful to criticize the Georgian society. But what I see is that I think in the 19th, so in this dark 19th, so after Perestroika, when there was chaos and a lot of men lost their jobs, and they could not adapt with reality. So many of them feel in depression, and women on the other side did not give up and adapted and started to save their families and to feed their families. So Georgia did not have a market economy. So we had this planned economic, and it comes the new situation, new reality, everything was no. So even my father, he is an engineer, and he lost his job. And I saw in my family so that the women in the family were stronger. So, and they knew exactly what they have to do. So, and they are very, I think this time for women in Georgian society was very important, and these important steps for emancipation were taken. And so women get more stronger and independent, and a lot of men, so they see himself or themselves as a loser, and they cannot deal with that. And I think this is a reason why.
And what do you mean by that they see themselves as losers?
So they are always the stories behind of this statistic, what we have in Georgia. So we have the very bad statistic that the young men killed their ex-wives, for example. And so the society and the lawyers, of course, and society try to explain why. So why are they so much aggressive, and why this aggression, as this violence against women is increasing in Georgia. So, and I think this is one of the reasons that they are so disappointed, and they are so much, they cannot deal with them, that women, female persons, they are stronger, independent, and they can save herself and her families. There are other reasons, of course, but I think this is one of the reasons. So why this happened now in Georgia, and I know that this is as on the agenda for a long time for international institutions in Georgia and for the by the EU, and I know this is one of the conditions for getting the candidate status for Georgia, maybe in 2023, but I think very important is to monitoring this process now very strictly and very strong of the side from the EU and that other international institutes. I hope I could explain what I mean. So with this point, and maybe Tina can explain this, why happened this now in Georgia and why we have so much aggression, young men in Georgia who killed his ex-wives.
Yeah, perhaps Tina, you could give us some more insight, because I don't think that we in Germany know about the facts and the figures about what's going on concerning violence against women, and probably you yourself face difficulties in your career concerning this topic.
It's a very difficult and sensitive issue, obviously. It's very difficult also to keep the balance when you talk about the growing violence, gender-based violence in Georgia. And honestly speaking, I don't even know, statistically speaking, if it is growing or not. So that's to be clear from the beginning. Statistically speaking, I do not really have that much of an information. But perception-wise, and I think this is more important because majority of the population has perceptions formed based on the news stories that they hear, and not necessarily based on the statistical documents issued by one ministry or another. Perception-wise, yes, violence against women is here. It's growing. It's more and more disastrous, and we have extreme cases of murders as well. So it is not just when we talk about domestic violence, it's not just women being beaten up or tortured at home, but we have lots of cases of murders as well. And unfortunately, those cases are not necessarily only related to families, to husband and wife. I mean, you have women beaten up, going under domestic violence because of their fathers-in-law, because of their own fathers, because of any man actually who lives in a household. The problem is so big that I'm not sure majority of Georgian women have solidarity towards those women as well. There was times when, in 90s exactly, when we started at the Georgian Young Lawyers Association, when we started women's program, we would go in all over the country, we would travel in the regions with all these questionnaires in a search of answers, search of the problems, search of solutions, sort of recording the women's voices. And there were occasions when women would tell us that if man is not a little bit brutal at home, it means that he does not care. If men are not jealous, it means that they don't care. And there was this perception very deeply rooted in minds of certain I can say, obviously, that that was the majority opinion. For God's sake, it was not majority opinion, but there were people who would talk to you very seriously about it and become angry at you if you had a different opinion. Up until now, you would hear publicly made statements, and Facebook, Georgian Facebook is very much famous for it, that it's a family matter, and we don't need to talk about it outside the family boundaries. People would seriously argue that it's no one else's business, and men and women will deal with their problems themselves at home if everybody just leaves them alone. So, number one answer to your question, why it is happening and how it's happening, is that there is no social support system that will protect those women, that make women feel secure. And because of that, they will speak up and defend not only their rights, but by speaking up, defend others as well, potential tomorrow's victims as well. You do not have that social protection system. You do not have the type of social solidarity out there, including amongst the women, that will serve as a safeguard for those who are ready to fight for their rights, and by that, for the rights of the others. Number two problem.
There are a lot of projects. I mean, of course, this is only one part of the game, but there were a lot of projects supported by, not only by German foundations, but internationally. So this did not have any impact?
Of course they do. And thanks God that we have those projects, particularly on the protection side, because it is exactly because of those projects that women at least get the lawyer support, legal support, they get social support, there are shelters established thanks to those foundations and the grants that various organizations, as well as the government, is getting from the donors to help them. But unfortunately, it's just one segment of it. It's not the solution does not come like that. Solution comes from much more fundamental approach, which usually is missing from the donors' assistance, because donors' assistance comes and goes. It's like 1 year, 3 years, 5 years maximum. That's not how. If you have a problem deeply rooted, this is not how it works, and this is not a cure for that. For example, I can give you a very brief example of the educational system, whether it is supporting it or whether it is encouraging or discouraging those kinds of attitudes. What kind of poetry we teach in schools? What kind of history examples we give? Khatia mentioned here. Actually, she mentioned it in a very interesting and wrong way, to be honest, that the best times in Georgia were when we had a woman in charge of the state in 12th century. Why she said it wrongly? Because she said when Queen Tamara was in charge. We don't call her Queen Tamara. We call her King Tamara. And this is one of those maybe very small, but very clear indications how difficult it is to accept that actually she was in charge, she, not he. And she was not a king, she was a queen. We never call her as a queen. We don't call her queen socially, we don't call her queen in books, we don't call her queen in history manuscripts. It is a revered king, Tamara. And this is an attitude you get all the time. It's just one example, very simple, but very indicative of this internal protest of recognizing women's success and superiority over something that is happening in your country.
But do you mean like in comparison with other, I mean, I'm perfectly aware that you cannot compare former Soviet states with others, because they're so different culture, tradition, heritage. But would you agree to say that, like in Georgia and Caucasus, this male domination is stronger as in other parts of former Soviet Union?
Well, you have parts in Soviet Union where women still walk in handscarves. We do not have handscarves. Even emotionally or visually, of course, we are not on the last place on it. No, definitely not. Women here are very much emancipated and liberated and free, particularly in the cities. If you walk in the city, in the streets of Tbilisi, there is no nanosecond when you have a feeling that there is a problem with women discrimination in this country because of the way women behave, girls behave, they are dressed, they act in public spaces. So that's one part of the deal. But once the door is closed, then the situation changes for many women in a completely different way. Again, not for everybody, of course. I can tell you that I do not know any discriminated woman, either at home or at the job place. But it means nothing, because my bubble is not necessarily indicative of the reality of this country. And this is exactly where most of us make mistake at certain points of our lives. That we kind of judge the situation from what we know, from what we see, from how the world looks from our own windows at home. But that's not the outlook of the world, unfortunately, because we managed to escape the brutality of life and be some kind of part of some kind of elite, social, political, cultural, doesn't matter, some kind of well-educated, more or less well-paid, bothered with different problems, larger problems, because we have the comfort of being bothered by the larger conflicts. And
Tina, what would you say, just to sum it up, the three biggest challenges right now for women in Georgian society are?
Yeah, I would say not for the women, but the biggest challenge for the Georgian society at large is the violence against women. We should do everything possible, the whole society, not just women. We should do everything possible to minimize first and then completely eradicate this absolutely dangerous, absolutely brutal practice that we have here. And we need to fight it on the level of mentality first. Here, somewhere in our heads, we need to defeat that Georgian who believes that it's okay if you sometimes, because you are jealous, you behave the way you behave, not to be very figurative on it. We need, the society at large needs to understand that it's their business as well. If they see person beaten up on the street randomly and they report to the police, it's exactly the same if they hear the same voices from their neighbor's house. And there is no difference, whether it's a random beating on the street or it's the beating at home behind the closed doors. And they need to report it to the police. The problem number two is that in the police force, we have the biggest problem. Because in the police force, probably those are exactly the men who treat their own women the way they should be investigating at the later stage. And this is why we do not get adequate response from the police. So the Georgian laws should be very clear, very strict, and very tough on the law enforcement itself when they investigate or when they deal with domestic violence cases. Even bigger is the problem with the children. And this is problem number three, that we need to fight our fathers. If we do not fight our fathers, that's how we are going to live the rest of our lives. With our husbands at home, with our boss men in the office, that's going to be way of life.
And what do you mean to fight our fathers?
Well, because this whole violent attitude starts exactly with the fathers. In most of the cases, when you record those cases, and we've been doing hundreds of those when I was working as a human rights lawyer in my first life, all those cases, all those troubles start with the fathers. It becomes kind of part of the life of these girls. And then when they are treated the same way somewhere else in their own families, it's kind of okay. They don't even see problem in it because this is how they were grown up, looking at their father violating their mother's
role model.
Also. Yeah, not the role model maybe, but sort of normal.
Normal. Mm-hmm.
Kind of normal, that this is how it is, how it was with my mom, this is how it was with my neighbor's mom, and why it should be different with me. This is exactly where the problem starts. This is why I say that donors' work is very important, but it's more of a state's role to fight it from the school age, from that generation, when those basic values, basic understandings of the attitudes, relations, the equality should be taught. It's very difficult to teach 37 years old men equality. He's not gonna get it. But it's much easier if he was taught exactly the same guy when he was 7 years old in a primary school.
Khatia, you mentioned already, I think in your second statement, the EU condition for Georgia's government to obtain the candidate status in 2023. And one of these demands concerns the strengthening of women's rights and legislation. So perhaps you can give us more insight what the Georgian government did in the past years to react, and even because they just want to obtain the candidate status.
Thank you very much for this question. So I want to add, so Tina explained it very well, and so I remember one story in my family. I think it was a party in my family in Georgia. I love the parties in Georgia in my family, and I'm always happy. And so we invited a lot of friends, and one friend of my brother mentioned, so she has to ask her husband, and the reaction of my brother was, please don't tell this my sister. And because and he told me already, please tell nothing, because this is a difference. Why I want to say this, it is very different in Georgia, and especially in the city, so in Tbilisi. So we grew up in very liberal family, so I cannot imagine in my family or in my bubble that could happen, but it happens, and this is reality, and this is very tragical reality. To the question, to this 12 points conditions, yeah, so I think if you ask in Georgia, so someone on the street, what are these 12 points and 12 conditions to get the candidate status, I think that a lot of people could answer, because this is every day on TV and in social media and Facebook, etc.
But not the gender parts.
Excuse me?
Not the gender parts.
Not the gender parts, yes, not the gender parts. Yes. Maybe I will start globally about this situation now regarding EU and candidate status, and so what, so which way or whether Georgia is going. So, and maybe then Tina can talk more about the new law about the gender in Georgia, because I know and I informed that Georgian government or Georgia parliament already novelled this law, but so I think we have a lot of questions, or the lawyers in Georgia who are working on this topic had a lot of questions about this. So maybe, so very short, introducing for our listeners, so why is the situation in Georgia very, how can I say, so very emotional now. So and June 24, so in this year, it was very bitter day for Georgian society. It was a historic day because Ukraine and Moldova received EU candidate status, and Georgia only European perspective, as a not the candidate status exactly, and with conditions, and they are so clear 12 conditions. And it's clear for all of us, I mean, for Georgians, for Moldovan, that we got this window of opportunity because the brave Ukrainians are still fighting for us, for our freedom and for our future peace in Europe. So why Georgia got on only these perspectives? In the fact, and this is a fact, this since 2012, so Georgian government and Georgian state is under the government of as a de facto of the oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili. So I think I'm not wrong when I say that. So he thinks that the state belongs him. And we have serious regressions in democratization and building of the independent state institutions. This is indicators for the Copenhagen criteria. And we have we had already very disputed elections, and I think controlled polarization of society, so very dramatical polarization of society, and the arrest of political opponents. I mean, the former president Mikhail Saakashvili is in jails now, and we have attacks of free media. And we are, I think, every day listening very critical comments from the side the Role Party and Georgian government addressed to the European parliamentarians and to the West. And so this was culminated, and the conclusion was that the president of EU Council, Charles Michel, tried to deal this political crisis, Georgia, and it failed. So what are these 12 points and 12 conditions? I would say, so we don't have.
Yeah, I think it's more important to focus on this women like this part. So perhaps you can once again say how the Georgian legislation changed or is planning to adapt to this point, especially if it concerns the women's rights.
What I know is that they are trying to novel this law about the gender point in Georgia, but I don't know this legislation well in Georgia, so I will be wrong if I can comment this. What I can say generally that a lot of things and a lot of law initiatives now in Georgia, they are only on the paper. So this is a big problem. So we have one side, so the initiative of this legislation, and law, the other side, how they will really implement. And this is a big problem. And so I don't feel competent of this on this issue to comment this law exactly. So I think maybe Tina can tell us more about this concrete initiative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Tina, perhaps you can answer also this question, and the audience, you're very invited to write your questions in the Q&A. You will find it when you look at the screen down. You have this button Q&A, and we already received one question. Perhaps Tina, you could take it. And there is a question if the female situation in all South Caucasus countries are the same, like Georgia, Azerbaijan, for example, or Armenia. So perhaps, Tina, you could start, and perhaps in the meantime, we will receive new questions.
Well, first of all, hi, Iris. I know the person who asked the question very well. She used to work in Georgia.
Yeah.
To see you still following Georgians. I don't know. I don't have an answer to this question. I cannot compare situation in Armenia, Azerbaijan with Georgia. It's not something that I've worked on or I have an expertise about. I always make this joke when I have this question that we at least had a woman minister of defense. Armenians and Azeris still did not. So on that we are...
And that was you, obviously.
Which is still far away for Armenia and Azerbaijan. So we are at least 2 steps ahead of them, president and the minister of defense. But seriously, unfortunately, I'm not an expert on this comparative analysis of different countries. As for the legislation, the biggest problem we have is that although, for example, Georgia joined Istanbul Protocol years back when we were in government at that time, I think in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 15, but sometimes in those years. I was still in parliament at that time, I remember, but the actual implementation and bringing the entire legislation in conformity with it is not done yet, and it's been already about 6-7 years that it should have been done. It speaks for lots of things. The same goes for the law on anti-discrimination. We have passed in 2014. It was an obligation that we should have fulfilled. There was a big struggle, but we managed to get through and had this legislation at place. But again, law is good, implementation not there. When you go from law to another, let's say that when you look at the criminal code, again, you have problems with definitions, you have the problems with a full functioning system, and not to speak a lot, not to go into the legal details of it, the general feeling or general understanding when you read Georgian legislation related to the gender equality, you have this absolute certainty that somebody who was writing those pieces of legislation was fulfilling obligations before various international organizations and not necessarily thinking about actual implementation of those. This sort of, oh, we have to do it because there is a box to be ticked. This sort of attitude is there. And this is why we do not have such a big progress on that. Different from other laws, for example, when something happens because there is a social pressure for it, there is a need for it, when generally there is a consensus that we need to have a law, then you have implementation also following the passing of the legislation. But in this case, unfortunately, you do not have that. So you still have a pretty strong resistance in a society to the fact that some people like me, Khatia, and others in this country, lots of other NGO activists here, dare to talk about violence against women, about violence in families, violence against girls, talk about the fathers mistreating their children, husbands.
And Tina, did this situation change? I'm sorry for this perhaps naive question, but did the situation change also to you, Khatia, after the 24th of February. Like now, Georgia is facing this. This, I even don't know how to call it, wave of immigrants from Russia. So these are also in a way for some of you perpetrators. Did the situation changed after the war in Ukraine started?
The war obviously changed a lot, not necessarily in the direction that we are talking about, not in terms of gender equality or human rights for that matter, but the global picture, the big picture obviously has changed. Now, Khatia was talking about sudden decisions or unexpected decisions we are getting from the European Union, which obviously nobody expected at the end of last year. You have the entire geopolitics changed, and we don't talk about Nord Stream 2 anymore. I mean, of course, lots of changed in your country, particularly the German political agenda has changed dramatically for these 6 months. Sometimes when I listen, for example, a couple of days ago when your president, Mr. Steinmeier, was in Ukraine, I was listening to him, and I remember him very well when he was Minister of Foreign Affairs. And this is a completely different man. Every word he said was, for me, a big surprise. And I was like...
It's good that you remember.
Yeah, of course I remember. It was exactly the same time when I was a minister and he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I remember very bitter meetings we used to have about Georgia's European future and Georgia's future in NATO. The same goes for Ukraine. And now he was talking like completely changed man, apologizing, accepting the problem that together with the other Germans created for us in 2008, later during the Crimea's annexation. This is all perfectly fine, obviously, and very good that at least now we have an understanding of the problem. But unfortunately, the change that we talk about in Georgia, I don't know how it's in Germany, but change that we talk about in Georgia is more about the societal attitudes than about the government policies. And this is where war in Ukraine, that if you thought about it before, like, okay, if there is a war in our neighborhood, what happens to Georgians? And the general understanding be, oh, the country will get unified and everybody will stand together and the resistance will be high and deterrence policies will be at place and the government, society, army, police, everybody will be working together, media, NGOs. Unfortunately, everything is just the other way around in Georgia. The war in Ukraine and the tragedy that we are facing every day is splitting the society more and more. And these red lines are much more visible now than it was before the war. Maybe it's a good thing. That's also an option. Somebody might look at it as a big eye-opening momentum for the voters in this country. But at the end of the day, I don't think it brings lots of positive for the future of Georgia. Because again, in difficult times, you need unity more than at other times, and it's not there.
And Khatia, we received also a very interesting question from the audience about the role of Georgian church as an obstacle towards women's rights. It's a very important topic, of course. So we cannot go in that because we only have like some more minutes left. But what are your thoughts and what's your comment on that?
Yeah, this is very difficult question to answer, but maybe very easy. So, so Georgian church is very strong and has a really big power in Georgia. So I don't know how the modern man in Georgian church or monk can answer on this question. Maybe he can answer of course, the rights of women are very important for us, but I think this is not on their agenda. So, with very quick answer, I can imagine
but
that
not on the agenda, or they really oppose.
I think it depends. So I cannot imagine that they can really oppose publicly on this issue, but maybe Sundays in the church. So they do this. So I'm not in Georgia, so I'm in Germany. So since 16 years, so it's difficult for me to answer this. So I believe in God and I love to go to church, but I cannot accept that someone in the church tell me what I have to do. So, but that's me. And I think the reality could be different in Georgia.
I think we should organize a whole discussion on this topic. I think this is just like a very short answer to this question. But the last question from the audience, Tina, it was, I don't know if you can see it in the chat, but I also asked you about the obstacles in the terms of, well, here it's concrete, the question experiences as the First Minister of Defense. So perhaps you could answer very shortly, like your main challenges and how you overcame these challenges.
Yes, thank you for that question. I think that as we do not have that much of a time, I will give you a dual answer, sort of. The woman becoming Minister of Defense in Georgia should be observed from two different angles. One, the acceptance or non-acceptance challenges or easiness from the army, and then acceptance and non-acceptance from the rest of the society. And those two are completely different things. I always say the Georgian army is the most democratic institution in Georgia out of any other state institution, including the big groups like police or teachers or doctors or anything. And there is a very simple reason for that. The Georgian servicemen, different from the rest of it, massively worked with their counterparts in the West because of our participation in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Kosovo. Georgians had an opportunity to fight shoulder to shoulder with women soldiers from all over the world. For them, this issue is much easier. This issue is very much normal. It's part of their daily lives. So whether the minister, and on top of it, minister is a civilian. Obviously, I'm not a soldier. I was not a soldier there. And I'm a politician. There was no single moment during my service as a Minister of Defense when I felt any aggression or any disapproval from the side of the army. It was a completely different story from this rest of it. The society, men, part of the society, particularly older men, never accepted me as a minister. And for the entire period, you would hear, particularly on social media, them criticizing me in a vivid language because of the kind of earrings I had, kind of dresses, the formal wear I was showing up, the way my hair was made, which was very funny at the same time because I never heard their criticism about decisions I was making, statements I was making, public speeches I had, because this was not about Minister of Defense. This was about woman being a Minister of Defense.
And something like yellow, I think what I heard is more yellow press than that.
No, it was very much social media, mainstreamed approach, particularly from the guys, former generals, former high-ranking militaries from either Soviet times or Shevardnadze's times. They were particularly upfront, criticizing me, again, not because of the decisions I was making as a Minister of Defense, but about my decisions as a woman, how I was dressed, what kind of earrings I had, and as I said, so on and so forth. And that was...
hearing that, this is my last question. What advice would you give a young woman to actively change their society, or with your experience? Because this, what you mentioned, is just, yeah, so interesting.
Any particular time period, or?
No, now, right now. Even with your experience.
How it changed?
I mean, no. What advice you would give a young woman now? Because you just mentioned that you were not judged by your by your decisions, your work, but more but like how you dressed and your hair and everything.
I understand. Sorry, I missed the first part, and that's why I did not get the question. Yeah, well, two sentences probably. One, if you want to make a very controversial decision, dress vividly. So everybody will forget what decision you made, and the whole discussion will be diverted to something else. That's actually a big plus we have, and we need to be using it when we are making unpopular decisions. And in our line of job, we need to make lots of unpopular decisions. And it's always nice, you know, you get the long earring, and then everybody will talk about it, and nobody pay attention that you've actually changed seriously the order of life in a particular area where you work. And two, be brave. I mean, my secret always was that I always cared about public opinion. Of course, if you are in politics, you care about the public opinion, but I never, ever let public opinion drive my decision-making. Never. There were lots of moments, I don't know, probably Khatia remembers now, for example, you asked about the church. It is extremely unpopular to criticize church in Georgia. It's a dominantly Orthodox Christian society. Church that goes to the church is under the Patriarch. I never, ever in my life made a pause criticizing the Patriarch or the church when I thought that they were making huge mistakes. And unfortunately, there are lots of occasions when they make huge mistakes for the benefit of the healthiness of this country, for the benefit of the democracy growing in this country. This retrogradic sort of Soviet mentality-driven attitudes that we are getting from certain types of clergy in this country is not helping at all to the development of Georgia. And that's why me being member of parliament, or me being human rights activist, or me being minister never mattered when it was about the principal issues that mattered. I knew I would risk by votes, but I did not care, because there are things that you will be remembered, that you took the principal positions. And that's the most important part of our lives. And I think that this is what makes also women particularly strong. I think because of many, many different reasons, we are more resistant, resilient than men are towards criticism or even we can use stronger language that sometimes comes against us, particularly when men get an idea that we took their job, that we took something that belonged to them, and now we just took it and are enjoying it. We just take it without any regard to what the men think about it. I think the biggest mistake women make is that I will probably repeat Madeleine Albright here, that we don't support each other. And this is extremely important. I was also in that situation. There was a moment in my life when I thought that, well, I became successful without anything, anyone behind me or in front of me. Nobody drove me to this success, so any woman can make it. It's not true. It's very selfish. We need to be driving force for the other women also. And we need to be motivating other women also. Otherwise, it will never work.
Thank you, Tina, for your powerful last statement. Thank you very much for everyone who was joining our talk, our female changemaker talk tonight. Thank you, Khatia, for all your comments and your insights. It was a great pleasure to talk about Georgia women's rights, the role of women. I think we should do another talk in Georgia, and even on particular issues on women's rights, because it was really interesting, especially the situation on about violence. Yeah, so I think this could be also an interesting topic for the Naumann Foundation. Thank you very much, the audience. Thank you to the Naumann Foundation for organizing these female changemaker talks. And the audience, I want to invite you to our next talk. It will be held on 8th of December on Nicaragua with Mrs. Valle, the wife of one of the opposition candidates. And we will talk about women standing up for human rights and political prisoners. It's a very sad but very important topic, so you're cordially invited. You will find all the announcement on the website. So please join us, and we will be happy to see you again. Thank you so much, and have a great night. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tina, and thank you.